Alright, hello and welcome back to new releases. I'm a little late this week, but I do have a good reason why, I promise. This week's been kind of tricky because I actually was sick earlier. I wasn't feeling too well, so I honestly had like zero energy to do anything. But you may have heard that already if you've listened to our podcast. The other reason why I'm like a little late making this video is actually that there was just so much good shit this week. I was really sidetracked by a lot of it. Notably, the Sorceted Glass album came out, and at that point when I found it, I was in the middle of listening to like all my albums for this week, and I actually stopped and listened to it 3 times in a row. So that took a lot of time. And that's why I'm a little late this week. That also is why I am filming in the dark. Because as you may have noticed, I sometimes on some of my previous videos it's been dark, and that's usually just because I end up waiting too long until the very last minute or so to make the video, and then I've lost all my natural light, and I'm too broke for proper lighting at night. At least not the ceiling lighting that just makes everything look horrible and yellow and grainy. So I have other things that make me look horrible and yellow and grainy, namely candles. But yeah, we should really get started this week because I have 8 releases to talk about, and most of them are actually big names. Yeah, let's get started with that. Anyways, the first album I want to talk about is Irreversible Mechanism's new album, Immersion. These guys are from Minsk, Belarus, and you may have heard them on their last album. They released a new album this week, and one of the things that's interesting about this in general is I'm not generally a fan of progressive death metal. It's just usually not my thing. I find a lot of it quite wanky and unoriginal and just generally unappealing. But this is definitely not the case with Irreversible Mechanism's new album. I find this one actually quite unique. It has a clear voice of its own, and it's not too wanky that it kind of overpowers the songwriting at all. So this is one that I would honestly feel comfortable recommending to someone who isn't a fan of progressive death metal, because although I have listened to a fair share of it, it's still not something I'm entirely into, but this is an album that I thoroughly enjoyed front to back despite that. So that is to its credit. This album has kind of a dreamy feel to it, although it's not cheesy in like the way their first album was kind of more synthy, I guess I want to say. This album is not quite like that. It just sounds more mature, more polished. But anyways, that was Irreversible Mechanism with Immersion, and now I'm moving on to number 7. I'm going to try and speed through these today. So number 7 is a Danish band from Copenhagen, I believe, and that's Erka with, what's their album? MMXVII. I think that's 2018, but I can't fucking read Roman numerals, so someone's gonna have to correct me on that most likely. But anyway, so this is an album released on Tour de Garde, and what they call themselves, I believe, is an atmospheric ethereal project. So what these guys actually are is they are quite atmospheric. They have a lot of ambient stuff that they include on there, and a lot of their ambient sections are pretty much just straight Burzum worship, straight Philosophism worship. But they do have, the whole release is punctuated with atmospheric black metal as well. But it's generally very heavy-handed on the ambient sections, and this is their first official release. But they do an amazing job with that ethereal aspect of their sound that they pointed out. That's definitely a word that I would use to describe them. And I believe one of the things that they're trying to do as well is kind of pay tribute to the history of their country. I mean, of Denmark, of Scandinavia in general. So you will hear a lot of those kind of like folkier elements coming into it along the way. Det er en mega fedt at finde flere bands fra Danmark. Tillykke til Erka, fordi det her er fantastisk, og jeg håber, I får set at være musik, fordi det er noget, jeg træner til mere af i fremtiden. Anyway, so the next band I'm going to talk about is Conan with Existential Void Guardian, and in the realm of Doom, at least, this has been a very anticipated album, and it came out on Napalm Records recently. Fear not, though, I mean, these guys, generally they're just, fuzz bombs. This album is not an exception to that at all. There's enough fuzz in this album to stuff an entire goddamn couch, so no concerns there. Their new drummer, Johnny King, actually seems to be a really good change for the band, definitely kicking things up a notch as far as the drums go. And this album is reasonably energetic, but it's still very down-tuned and it's swampy. which is definitely everything you want from Conan. And this is their fourth full length. The last one was 2016's, I think it was called Revengeance. But anyways, Existential Void Guardian, which is this one, it has a little more variation to it than Revengeance, I find. Just generally, you can hear these guys improving their craft. And, that is all you can ask for from bands that continue to release albums. Anyways, the next album is Hyperdancer with Nexus of Teeth. These guys are another Danish band, which makes me happy because I love finding more Danish bands. But anyways, they're not uniquely Danish. I think they're a split project between Denmark and Turkey. And this came out on Dark Descent Records, and what this is some OSDM with fantastic groove, and it's got a lot of dissonance to it. The riffs are absolutely fucking killer. They're amazing, and this album just has excellent variety in general in both pace and feel. And honestly, it's the kind of grimy type of album that makes you feel like you could thrive in the lowest, most disgusting places of the earth and the dentist's office. If you go onto their Bandcamp page, you can actually see a whole bunch of people making teeth-related jokes. And if you don't know what hyperdontia is, I think that's when you have too many teeth. So if you're squeamish, I would recommend not looking that up on Google Images. But yeah, that is Hyperdancer with Nexus of Teeth, some absolutely fucking fantastic death metal from this week. Which brings me to some more absolutely fucking fantastic death metal, because this one is actually a really special release. This is Abhorrence with Megalohydrothalassophobia. And anyways, it did take me a few practice runs to say that right. But so these guys, they're classic Finnish old school death metal, and the only reason at all that they would even need an introduction is just because it's been so long since they last released anything. I mean, I know they've put out some compilations, and I think one compilation actually. My point is really, they've released things, but they haven't really released new material. And they keep teasing us with the fact that they're breaking up or some shit, and then they go ahead and announce a reunion tour. And I don't know if this album means they're breaking up, or I don't know if they've worked it out and maybe they're back together, or I don't know what's going on with this, but whatever it is, I appreciate it. Anyways, so yeah, this came out on Svart Records, and so the name actually means fear of big things lurking in the water, like the Kraken coming up and swallowing a ship and stuff like that. This is interesting to compare to their older material, because obviously they're so much older now. It's been so much time since they released, I think, what was it? They had an EP in 91, I believe, and I think that might have been the last new material they released. So, how is this different from that? Well, not that I would call this release tame by any means, but I just find that this one is a little lower in aggression, a little more mellow than their earlier stuff, and I mean, that is inevitable, unfortunately. But what it lacks, it also makes up for in terms of songwriting. It's a very well put together album overall, and I would absolutely not cite the lesser aggression as a reason not to listen to this album, because it redeems itself in every way regardless. Then again, I mean, I don't know if this means they're back together or not. I assume they're going to be playing this stuff on tours, but I don't know. I think everybody's a little confused with what's happening with Abhorrence. The next song I'm going to talk about is Infernal Coil with Within a World Forgotten, and this is one that I'm actually looking quite a bit forward to talking about, because I would like to draw attention to it. And I mean, I know it's really hard for bands to compete with other bands. Infernal Coil, for example, I have a feeling this album is going to get quite overshadowed by the other things that have come out this week, and I would say that's a mistake, because this album has its own merit, and it has a lot of that. And, I mean, just because bands like Archgoat and Sorceted Glass are releasing albums this week, I have a feeling that this one is going to suffer for that, and it's always really sad when that happens. So I hope that's not something that we see happening here, because this is a really cool release. But anyways, this is their very first full-length release. It's out on Profound Lore, and, anyways, they're from Idaho, and they are what they call grinding death metal, more of death metal with grindcore influences, but this one's tricky because they actually draw in some black metal influence as well. There's just a lot of different things being melted together here. It's like a big melting pot of a whole bunch of different styles and different ideas. Mostly what this album is an explosion of just rage and fury and chaos and destruction and everything horrible. And it honestly almost makes sense that it was released, it hit the same time as Hurricane Florence. But for some reason, not for some reason, because obviously it's done very purposefully, but it also has these atmospheric, more calm moments about it. And I believe that's because this album is kind of nature themed as well. It's supposed to really open your eyes to the destruction, but also absolute beauty that nature has to offer. Like the contrast between just beauty and horrifying things and destruction and death, like a hurricane, for example. So they think they do a really good job of symbolizing that. But like I said, it's a huge melting pot of a whole bunch of different styles and genres. So sometimes the transitions between those different sections I find are slightly questionable. But not that it's bad. They make it work and it's great. Although this is not an album that you can listen to and instantly, know exactly what you think about it. This is something that takes a while to unpack. So be prepared to listen definitely several times before you can fully make up your mind about it. If you don't like it on the first go, then, give it another spin and see what happens. But to be honest, this is one that I still need to spend time on. There are so many albums that came out this week that I need to spend more time on. Usually I like to not finish these. I usually like to wait to do these videos until I have full and informed opinions on everything I'm talking about, which is why I'm usually late on this, to be honest, because sometimes albums take more listens than you expect. But with just the sheer volume of stuff that came out this week, I didn't have time to really fully complete the process, and unfortunately this is one of the ones that's going to suffer for that because I don't have a fully formed opinion. But I advise you to take that into account when you're making your own opinions on this. And definitely don't overlook this in the face of albums like The Luciferian Crown or Sorcier de Glace, because this is not something that's to be taken lightly this year. That being said, that brings me to my number 2, which I'm going to get some shit from at least one person called Clint for this being my number 2 this week. But this is Archgoat with The Luciferian Crown. This came out on Debember Morty. But anyways, I know this is going to be album of the year for a lot of people, probably. But where do you fucking start with Archgoat? I mean, they kind of established themselves as being on the cutting edge of war metal with Horror of Bethlehem, and that came out in 2006. And then eventually they went on to release the fucking banger that is the Apocalyptic Triumphator, and that was in 2015. And after they did that, I didn't think they could do that again. I mean, usually when a band releases an album that's just that good on that level, you don't see them ever topping that. But I guess spoke too soon on that one. Although this one is another one that I'm going to have to listen to a few more times to fully comprehend, but you should be satisfied to know that it is at the very least on par with the Apocalyptic Triumphator. Now anyways, so this one, the way it differs is it's kind of moving on stylistically a little. On every single one of their albums, they've kind of ventured further out. Really always progressing with their sound. And so this one, it sounds slightly more polished, but more theatrical as well. You can hear them experimenting with more, synths and stuff like that. And of course you have Lord Angelslayer still just, taunting all of us with those fucking demonic vocals that are oddly satisfying in a lot of ways, which is something we discussed on the podcast, actually. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to be talking more about the podcast at the end, what we covered and all that. But anyways, like I said, this is one that's definitely going to take quite a few listens. I suspect my opinion on this is going to change between now and the end of the year. But this is a major event of 2018, and if you don't listen to this, you are definitely missing out on a lot of the conversations that are happening, especially in the war metal world right now, because this is definitely shaking things up quite a bit. My number 1 this week, if you've been following me for a while, maybe on the blog or YouTube or whatever, you probably will you'd probably expect that this is coming. But anyways, my number 1 this week is Sorcier de Glace with their self-titled item, Sorcier de Glace. And so they released kind of like a mini statement on this album talking about how this is a concept album, and it's kind of, going back to, I really should have found this statement exactly, but saying something about how it's going back to the early days behind the music of Sorcier de Glace. And so I think one flaw in this album is that people might be turned off of it when they put it on, because it's kind of misleading. You might look at that and think, this is going to go back to Snowland days, because, that's definitely what I thought when I first saw that statement. But I don't think they'll ever fully go back there, ever, especially because they're, refusing to use keyboards now, because it's not metal enough. So, I actually don't know if you guys listen to much Sorcier de Glace, but they actually went back and re-recorded Snowland without keyboards. It's, a big thing for them now, I think. But anyways, what they did do on this album is, it's not really an exploration of, their roots as a band. It's more an exploration of what created their music and all the different pieces that go into it to make them who they are. This is by far the most adventurous, most out-of-the-box thing Sorcier de Glace have ever done in their entire career. And yet, despite how different it is, you can still tell that it is 100% them. I think Sorcier de Glace are a brilliant example on this album of a band that came together from so many different parts, so many different pieces, and yet they're still, when all those pieces come together, they're more than the sum of their parts, really. When you listen to this album, they're going all over the place with, you can hear a lot of Immortal influence, absolutely, but then they also have these, there's parts where they're sounding more like Obtained Enslavement. They have, kind of pagan, Dark Medieval Times influenced parts and stuff like that. They even go as far as, Written in Waters, Vidboon's Ende, they're on the, on some of the bass lines and stuff like that, which I was talking to Chandler about. I don't know if you guys have subscribed to his channel at all, but he is Chandler Brown, and he's a friend of mine. We talk about music quite a bit. But anyways, this is all over the map. Absolutely all over the map, and yet it still makes sense in a very satisfying, very well put together way. And if anything, this just goes to show how much of a killer band Sorcier de Glace really are. Because it takes an absolute monster of a musician to be able to pull together an album that is so all over the place like this one is. And they said it's a concept album. They haven't released any lyrics for it. And there are lyrics. I can pick up certain parts of them, but I'm honestly horrible at lyrics. They are back and forth between French and English, and that's not a problem because I speak French, so I can understand it. That's not the issue. It's just that usually when I listen to albums, I'm just, even if it's in English, which is my first language, I'm just horrible at listening to things like that. I'm just really bad with lyrics. But anyways, I think the concept of this album is not so much, what they're singing about, what they're talking about. It's more about them as a band and how they've changed, how who they've been listening to has changed. And it's really the story of Sorcier de Glace at the end of the day. And I think that it is fucking incredible. It is way too early to be talking about things like Album of the Year or anything like that, but at this rate, I wouldn't be surprised if this ended up on my end of the year list, if not at the top. I'm serious, I love this album, and I may be just too excited about this because, Québécois black metal is kind of like my most beloved form of music. But anyways, this is not something to be ignored. It's not. You just have to go into it with the recognition that it is not going to sound like Snowland. They're never going to go back there. And just kind of come into it with an open mind. So if you do that, I think you will be blown the fuck away. The other thing that I would like to mention, obviously you guys should know this already. I don't think most of you are the type to shuffle albums or anything stupid like that. Considering if you guys are into black metal and all that, this isn't really a genre that's conducive to those types of things. But this is an album that you need to focus on. It's not optional. You can't listen to this in pieces. They suggest, getting in a dark room and burning candles and all that. And that's actually exactly what I was doing when I heard this for the first time. I burned 5,000 goddamn candles for this album. And I listened to it 3 times in a row. And then when I woke up this morning, I put it on again. So this is not something this is a focusing experience, almost like a meditation. So take it seriously, and I think that you will get unlimited enjoyment out of this album. I want to review this eventually, so I don't want to talk too much about it. I think I may already have, But anyways, I do have a couple reviews I would like to do. One of them is on the new Pig Destroyer album, which I didn't talk about in new releases for precisely that reason. And this one I was toying with the idea of cutting it out of new releases just because I do want to review it, but at the end of the day, like, I'm just too excited about it and I didn't want to wait until I could prepare a review video. But anyways, that's new releases for this week, and this has been a fucking enormous week. Absolutely huge. So, this is not the good week to be lazy with listening to new releases. If you have been lazy, then you have homework to do. I'm sorry for that. But yeah, hopefully this is a good starting point for anybody who is looking to hear more about the amazing things that came out this week. I haven't included a lot of albums of the caliber I normally would include because usually it's like kind of a gradient where there's, some good releases. I don't include, obviously, anything mediocre in these videos, but this week, because you're competing with names like Sorcier de Glace and Archgoat, and stuff like that, anything that was, like, even really good albums that I found, I just didn't include them because they're not on par. So there are other great things that have come out this week, but I can't talk about, like, fucking 15 albums. This is 8, and this is already going, way over time. But anyways, yeah, that was new releases for the week, and before I head out, I just want to touch on some quick things that have happened this week other than that. So I know I said a while ago I'd be making recent listens videos every week, and I actually didn't this week. The reason for that is because the things I've been listening to are all new releases stuff, and all stuff that I've been talking about on the podcast on Sunday. We did release a podcast Sunday, and the theme is war metal, which is something that Clint has been really excited about because that is his thing. Like, I have Quebecois black metal, and he's got his war metal. And that is something there's a lot of confusion out there on. I know there's a lot of people that aren't exactly clear on what war metal is, or bestial black metal, and definitely a lot of the resources that you might find on the topic are kind of convoluted as well and unclear. So that's something that we hope to clarify for you guys. You can check that out on takethispersonally.wordpress.com. It is a longer one. I believe it runs about an hour and a half, an hour 45. But it's a fun one. I enjoyed it a lot. So that's what was going on with me this week. And anyways, so I'm going to be listening to a bunch of these albums in the next probably coming months. So you may hear me talking about these again. I may feel the need to make a video kind of like re-explaining my opinions on a couple of these albums if they change, because like I mentioned, this is a really heavy-hitting week. But yeah, I will see you guys next week for some more new releases.